Welcome to the Hard Signal Podcast, a production of Next Gen Insight. And I'm Clayton Tidwell, its founder. Today's guest is Clay Verkaik, General Manager of Frog Holler Produce in Detroit, a chef-driven produce company that has been connecting Michigan farms with restaurant kitchens for over 45 years. Before joining Frog Holler, Clay worked as a product specialist at Van Eerden Food Service and as produce director at the Standard Market, which means he's seen the business from the distribution side, the retail side, and now the specialty operation side. In this conversation, we get into what it really means to source local in Michigan, where the produce supply chain is under pressure, and how a 45-year-old company with a very specific identity stays relevant inside a bigger corporate structure. Welcome to Hard Signal, Clay. To begin, please tell us about your path to produce and specifically how you ended up at Frog Holler.
Yeah. So it's kind of been a wild ride. You touched on just a little bit of it, but kind of grew up in it. Both of my grandparents were farmers, and my dad sold seed. When I was young, I worked in the grocery store for the produce department, and in college got an internship working for Bolt House Farms, and ended up getting a full-time position with them doing merchandising as they had launched their beverage line. After a year and a half or so, or a couple of years of doing that, moved to the Chicago area out of their new distribution center, Fresh Logistics, onto the carrot side, and had worked with them out of Chicago for a few years before getting connected with the retail and restaurant startup in the Chicago suburbs, where I became the director of produce, walking the Chicago international market, haggling with all the terminal suppliers day to day, getting up super early and dealing with that to supply the grocery store and the restaurant for about 5 years or so, doing that role, and before getting connected with Van Eerden Food Service out of Grand Rapids to be their produce specialist. And in that role was, kind of my first time with food service, going out and seeing restaurant operators from the internal side versus being on the terminal, buying everything myself. Now it was on the selling side to the restaurant operators, opposed to just trying to supply. And Van Eerden Food Service had acquired Frog Holler Produce as I was onboarding, getting back to their roots where Van Eerden had started 100+ years ago as a produce company, that they wanted to get back to have a sole produce distributor. And Frog Holler was that vision. Through a couple other acquisitions, Frog Holler has grown to the mid-sized produce distributor that we are today.
Just out of curiosity, what's the origin of the name Frog Holler?
So there's a Frog Holler farm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and that is
Okay.
the original owner worked on that farm, and he started his own distribution network out of it. He had a bunch of friends that were foodies and in the restaurant industry in Ann Arbor, and he started distributing the Frog Holler produce to them, and decided to branch out and start getting stuff just not grown on the farm, but available from the Detroit produce terminal, and just grew his own little distribution business.
All right. Found it to be an interesting name.
Yeah.
So Frog Holler's identity is very much chef driven. You're serving independent fine dining and high expectation restaurant clients. Your staff are trained produce specialists, not generic distribution drivers. And that positioning sounds great, but comes with real operational costs and customer concentration risks. When you're competing against Cisco and US Foods on one side and direct from farm models on the other, where does Frog Holler actually win, and where do you sometimes lose business?
Yeah, we have to be nimble and find lots of different avenues. So we're members with a few different GPOs to help on the purchasing side with different types of contracts that we have, different direct buys and market buys that we have out of, whether it's Florida, California, Arizona, Mexico, doesn't matter. There's plenty of opportunities there, and where the GPO pools its resources, then we can kind of compete on the stage of a Cisco or a US Foods or a Gordon's, even though Frog Holler doesn't necessarily have that volume. But we're also nimble in the fact that we are 15 minutes away from the Detroit produce terminal, where we have a buyer that's down there every day shopping, haggling, what I used to do in Chicago, that can, find really good deals that are going to be market beaters. And I don't, the big guys, the Cisco's, they're not doing that. They might buy from them, but it's a phone call, and those guys on the markets probably lick their chops at that phone call. So with us having to be creative, having to really find ways to compete, that's a couple of ways that we're doing it.
It's kind of like being down in the trenches at those distribution centers and having your having your guy there feeling the pulse of the market on a daily basis.
Yeah, and he's out there, he's down there at 2 a.m. and he's in and out of their coolers. He's looking at the quality. There's 6 or 7 different houses down there that he shops that all have like products. And so, they've got to be competitive on price because they know that we have to. And so then it becomes a decision of who's got quality, who's got price, who's got what, and where do we land and all that, knowing what the market is, right? What they set the market at. And hey, our sales team, they tell us where the big players are at on the
Uh, Give me an example of maybe a recent, maybe odd or unusual request from a chef that came in, and what did it take to find it, to source it, and did you make money on it, or did you do it for relationship purposes when it probably did cost you a little bit?
Yeah, I just trying to think of something that stands out. We'll just say cherry bomb peppers. They're not something that's so common anymore. You go to the terminal and they don't have it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, because for whatever reason it got shoved to them. Otherwise, it's a special order, and we go through all of our different channels of different grower shippers that we have and find it. And if we can't find it locally or in any of our easy networks, we have companies that we fly product in for, and that's when we get to what you had just kind of mentioned of, did you make any money on it? Or is it more for the relationship? And those ones usually are about the relationship. When you fly something in, it just gets so costly and you hope to kind of break even. And then that's just product cost, right? Then you forget about the fact that you had to have someone go to the airport to pick it up. You had to do this special phone call and deal with all this stuff and all of the hidden costs associated with sourcing that one-off case.
Michigan has a real growing season, very strong in the summer, but nearly absent in the winter. Frog Holler sources daily from the Detroit produce terminal, maintains direct Michigan grower relationships, and supplements with out of region product when local isn't available. How do you maintain a locally grown identity when you literally can't source everything locally for half the year?
Yeah. Fortunately, our customers know the growing season, and we educate as much as we can. There are still people that don't realize bananas are not grown in Michigan. So it's on us to educate them. But there are ways, at least in our system, that we can call out and highlight when things are local, whether where they're from, whether they're Michigan, or even if we can call out a specific farm if we have a good deal and good relationship with them. But it's in promotion from our sales team and in our item descriptions and our online ordering to call out what's local. And we've got such great partnerships with the growers that we've been with for years, but we also are unique here in the greater Detroit area where we have the Eastern market. And that's sort of like the produce terminals where the local growers have a place to aggregate and they'll back their trucks up. And you can, instead of walking to a warehouse cooler, you're walking onto a truck and picking out your pallets of product from them. The Eastern market has 7 different sheds that growers are backing semis into. And so we're shopping it that way. So we have a number of different avenues that we go to stay as local as we can when in season. And then there are other commodities that, we grow storage crops here that will last into the winter. So, I mean, apples are apples, right? We have controlled atmosphere for that. Not at Frog, but our suppliers do. So we can get Michigan apples for close to year round. We can do the same with cabbage, with beets, with the winter squash. And so we really try to call that out and give everybody kind of a timetable of how long we're going to be in with these local products, so they can plan their menus. They can highlight the different farms that we have, and even from a week to week, day to day perspective, they can change their menus. A lot of our customers actually you will use paper menus and not the hard plastic because they want to be able to change and call things out.
Hmm. When you're dealing in the off season, or well, how strong are your relationships, and are you building even further with those growers in California and southern Texas and in Florida, and perhaps even in Mexico? And then when you are sourcing through them, how difficult do you find maintaining the quality standards that your chefs expect?
Yeah. Well, as we continue to grow, that helps. Just sheer volume makes you a better partner often. So that certainly helps strengthen those relationships. But from the quality perspective, it doesn't matter what size you are. You have expectations, you have specifics for your chefs that they need. And then it just comes down to accountability with the grower shipper of being upfront of what your expectations are so that they don't ship you be something that doesn't work for you and your program. It doesn't mean it's going to often doesn't mean it's going to be the cheapest thing, but fortunately in the produce industry, it's kind of the inverse. When things are great, they're bountiful, they're plentiful, they're great quality, they're the cheapest. And when they're awful and terrible quality and scarce, then they're the most expensive. But yeah, it's just continuous networking and communication to build those relationships to strengthen them as much as you can.
Going back to your personal story a bit, Van Eerden Food Services acquired Frog Holler in 2016, and you came from Van Eerden shortly, I guess, shortly after you joined. That's an unusual vantage point. You've seen both sides of the acquisition. What looks different from inside Frog Holler than it did from the now parent company?
The parent company, Van Eerden, they do a great job in what they do in their broad line. So they carry, I don't know, 10,000 or so SKUs versus Frog Holler, we're in the hundreds because we are just produce focused and they are everything focused. So, they rely heavily on systems and processes to really hunt down every single penny. 'Cause there's not a lot of money in distribution, and certainly in the broad line when you have that many cases. And they've got a very unique WMS system that can cube out pallets and all this kind of stuff versus over at Frog Holler. It's we want to be as systematized as we can, but you're dealing with products that are going to come in different pack sizes and different cases and different weights from a day-to-day basis based on who you're sourcing from. So it's really different in that light. There's so much structure on how they receive things on the broadline side versus Frog. And so our warehouse people, you said it at the very beginning, like we have to be produce specialists. So even our warehouse guys, their warehouse guys do not have to be produce specialists. Their warehouse guys have to be masters at building pallets, picking cases, efficiency, speed. Our guys are opening cases and looking inside and checking quality. Accuracy is the most important thing, and quality is the most important thing. And it's not so much about how that pallet is perfectly stacked and wrapped and on the truck so that you can fit everything to the ceiling and front to back. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest differences.
From a systems or a workflow or a SOP perspective, has Van Eerden been able to bring anything operationally to Frog Holler that
Absolutely.
Frog Holler didn't have before?
Absolutely. And that a lot of the Frog Holler history being that small company that was acquired and there's been some other acquisitions, and we built a sales team, and so we've continued to grow. There's been a huge need for us to build processes, but they can't be the same thing as what works at Van Eerden. Their warehouse is, I don't know, 20 times the size of ours. And so what works on that grand scale doesn't necessarily work here. And we have a different go-to-market strategy in the way that we handle product. So anytime we face a problem or anytime we're trying to build a process, we go right to Vayner and we go right to the parent company. What do you guys do for this? Okay, now how do we make that work for the produce company? How do we make that work on our scale for what we're trying to do? So yeah, tons of overlap, but it always kind of morphs.
And Van Eerden can negotiate better pricing and on logistics, equipment, and financing. Does that flow down to you guys as well? Do you
Absolutely.
accrue that benefit?
Yep. So we share in resources as much as we can. We rely on them for a lot of our equipment, for a lot of just we rely on them for a lot of that type of stuff, and even HR, accounting, not just equipment, but people and positions.
You're SQF Level 2 certified. That's
Yep.
not a small investment, and it's a meaningful commitment for a produce distributor. Now, the FSMA's produce safety rule traceability requirements are increasing the documentation burden on distributors like Frog Holler. What does the compliance work actually look like in practice? And is it creating any operational value, or do you view it as pure overhead?
That's tough.
Because
Yeah.
you're probably still in the middle of even trying to implement it, right?
Right. We are still working on upgrading to the FSMA 204 regulations, and we've got a decent ways to go. And fortunately, they pushed the dates back. But the SQF framework certainly helps us. And so, from a food safety perspective of how we handle stuff, how we keep our warehouse clean, and all that is not too terribly different for what we see so far. A lot of it comes down to barcodes and systems that really allows traceability from one system to the next, versus I can provide traceability for you right now. If you were to say, hey, there's a recall on romaine lettuce, I could figure out within probably less than 5 minutes everybody who got our romaine, which specific lot had that issue, and that's because of our SQF certification and the ERP that we have. But yeah, that FSMA 204 and that traceability and barcoding, and it's a whole other level that comes with different infrastructure.
And that barcoding, is it still very much spreadsheet connected, or you did mention ERP, so you're tracing
That
it
should
through
be
on your ERP?
Yeah, it's going to be going through. I think it's going to probably force an upgrade into away from an ERP into a WMS.
Okay.
Right now, our ERP is pretty basic. It has its own WMS capabilities, but just not its own separate WMS program that has all the strengths required.
Where do you see Michigan produce distribution in 5 years? More consolidation or more a move back to direct to farm or something different?
It's funny. I see more consolidation. I see more of the smaller guys not getting pushed aside, but maybe selling out or joining forces, I suppose, for their own conglomerates. But it's there is a more consolidation, but it is kind of the opposite of what customers want, right? Customers voice that they want small, they want niche, they want story, they want history, they want to feel connected to the farmer. But all of these regulations, all of these costs are becoming too high to incur for the small local farmer. They don't have the resources to handle everything that's been requested of them, and that's sort of pushing them out.
And that leads to that push-pull of that the customer wants the story, but would prefer a lower cost, but yet you just can't get the lower cost to meet all the regulatory burden and the safety requirements around that. Yeah. Let's do a little lightning round here. What's your favorite Michigan-grown product to work with? Not necessarily to eat, but to work with.
But to work with cabbage, it's easy.
Let's hear it for cabbage.
Yeah.
What's the most underrated vegetable that restaurants should be putting on menus right now?
Oh man, I'd say Brussels sprouts, but they're on every menu now. I
Yeah,
love Brussels
yeah.
sprouts.
10 years ago, that was the right answer.
Right, right. And kale's another one that's everywhere. So I think beets. I think beets are kind of popular, but I think they'll continue to get more popular. They're great in a salad. They're great roasted. They're great color. They're great on menus. They're very earthy. Yeah, I'd say
My
beet.
wife and I go to a restaurant and they have this fantastic beet hummus that is just amazing.
There you go.
What would be one produce trend that you think is overhyped?
Juicing, celery juice in particular. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, we'll just leave it there.
Yeah, any juice where you take out the fiber and you just keep all the sugar.
Right. It's sugar water. Because yeah.
All right. Is there anything that maybe I didn't cover that you'd like to mention to our audience?
Well, I mean, no, I came into this looking to just have some dialogue, some conversation. I think we had some good conversation here, and I guess I would just say to the audience, eat your fruits and vegetables, support your local farms and your local restaurants.
Yeah, buy local when you can and don't eat at chain restaurants.
Yeah,
Right. All right. Well, Clay, thank you very much for joining me today. And I'm hoping that anybody that winds up in the greater Detroit area will dine at one of your customers' restaurants.
absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.